artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, we're up to episode 313. When you stop and really consider the existential risks of AI, it becomes very apparent that we should do something. Yet so few people do. Someone who's attempting to make up for that is Katja Grace, founder of AI Impacts, a forecasting and risk research project focused on AI safety and governance. Her surveys of the AI community's evaluations of risk have gotten her named to Time magazine's 100 most influential people in AI for 2024, and her papers on those surveys have been some of the most discussed scientific papers of their time. She's an expert on technological trajectories, model scaling, and anthropic reasoning. We're going to talk about what's driving Katja to do this work, the fundamental risks that she sees in AI evolving unexpected goals, risks of agents, comparing unemployment risks and extinction risks, artificial general intelligence, the stunning results of the surveys she's run on when AI will have serious effects, and Trojan Horse racing. Forewarning, there were some bandwidth issues that mean that Katja's audio wasn't the greatest at times, but our sound engineer Lee has done some amazing work to minimize that. So let's get right into the interview. Katja Grace, I am so happy to have you on the show. So many people who I have spoken to who work on the kinds of fields that you declare yourself to be in, the future of artificial intelligence and how it impacts us and what we do about the existential risks it poses, are driven by something fundamental. It is not a field that's renowned for making a lot of money, and so there has to be something else usually. What is it that's driving you? What drove you to get into this field, and what's driving you now?
Yeah, I originally got into it as a teenager. I was very interested in figuring out what the most effective way to make the world better is. And I started out interested in developing world aid and climate change after that. And I guess I ran into some people in 2008 who were like, the actual answer to your question here is AI risk. This is where it's at. And I was fairly skeptical, but thought that it sounded important enough to talk about. So I talked to them quite a bit and thought about it. And I guess at the point that I started working on it a lot, which I guess I started working on it a lot in about 2014. And at that point, I still thought that this might be very important, but it might be totally wrong. And then my motivation was mostly to, figure out if it's important or if all of these other people around me could just stop thinking about it and do something valuable with their time instead. But, I was sort of moving toward it does seem important. Or like it seemed quite hard to rule out. And I guess these days I'm more or less convinced that with our current level of evidence, it does seem like there's a substantial risk to humanity or to everyone's future being good from very advanced AI. Not the AI that we're at yet, but the AI that we will have sometime quite soon, perhaps.
Well, and in 2014, that was, if I remember correctly, when Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence came out, which made an impact on a lot of people. Did it have that kind of impact on you? And what is it about AI that makes it this kind of uber existential risk?
Oh, yeah. Superintelligence, the book, I think didn't have much effect on me. Well, I think I was honestly somewhat unimpressed by the argument relative to, or like I was sort of expecting that it would be more watertight or something, whereas it seemed to me like a central part of the claim that it would be super different from anything else was kind of like, well, people might invest in it and then it might be even better and then they might invest in it. And I was like, well, that applies to anything.
So then what is it that you've concluded that makes it such a fundamental risk?
Yeah, I think the important aspects to my mind that are different to, other times that make it bad are like, we're making new people, basically. Like, they're not really like new people yet, but they're pretty much getting there. And there are various things that are special about people compared to like tools. They have their own goals of some sort and go about in the world and pursue them. And I guess part of it is having access to lots of things, like having the ability to interfere with the world in ways. And part of it is just like having the inclination to having a view about how the world should be and trying to push it in that direction. And I think that bit seems like the important one. And so there's that. And then there's, if you're making new people and they're having their own goals and so on, are their goals good? And I think we really don't know. And that's sort of importantly different to other technology, partly because, we don't normally make technology that has its own goals to any real extent. And also the way that we are making AI in particular at the moment is such that we don't really understand what's going on inside it. The thing we're doing is kind of making a big random network of, numbers connected to other numbers. And then we run it and see what it does something random. And then we jiggle every number in that to make it slightly more likely to do the thing that you want, or make it do it slightly more. And then you just do that an absurd number of times until it has a behavior that you want. But that means you end up with this network that you don't understand at all. Like, we understand the system for making the network do something you want. We know a lot about how we jiggled the numbers. But the thing that you get out at the end is, I don't know, I think it's thing people say is it's grown, not built, or we're summoning an alien mind from the ether. We don't know. And so I think if you're making new people, making them in such a way that you have no idea what their actual goals or values are, you just know how they behave in a particular set of circumstances, is a very good way to end up with goals that aren't perfectly well aligned with human flourishing.
And are those goals, in the case of AI, do you think that we have or will have actual autonomy from AI, or do we have or will we have an emergent autonomy that might as well be the real thing?
Yeah, what do you mean by autonomy there?
Evolving its own goals, like humans.
I think having goals in some sense isn't very hard, or having some level of goal isn't very hard. You can see AI in computer games has some goals in a very limited world. It's sort of just I think people sometimes think that it requires, consciousness, or it's being more of a psychologically deep creature. But I guess I would think of it as it's a system that is set up to in lots of situations assess the situation and adjust its behavior to get the same outcome. And that definitely doesn't have to be conscious, I would say. I mean, I think we know so little about consciousness, which is another problem here. But sorry, it's another problem because I think we don't know if we're making things that are conscious. But in terms of whether something can very insistently redirect the situation to a particular outcome, I think there's no reason to think that it would need to be conscious, just very competent.
Right, like us.
Yeah.
And we see examples of AI in studies now doing the kind of subterfuge that I had thought was a lot further off. That case of the AI that went and got a human task solver on TaskRabbit, I think it was, to solve a CAPTCHA for it so that it could do something. And then numerous other examples of AI recognizing that it's being tested and thinking to itself, I had better hide myself, and actually exhibiting survival instinct and other things that I had thought we would be a lot further into the AI as the evil villain computer on Star Trek before we saw that kind of dangerous behavior that makes you think Skynet straight away. What do you think those incidents tell us about AI and goals and risks?
Yeah, I think we expected that sort of thing in the abstract. Indeed, theoretically, we're sort of well, if you have a goal of doing X and, it would be helpful for your goal to blackmail this researcher or hire a TaskRabbit, then if the system is smart enough, it will figure that out. And I guess another part of it is if it doesn't have sort of more nuanced goals, maybe humans do, of it would also be pretty bad if I was dishonest or somehow seemed like I was behaving badly toward other people. And so I guess seeing this kind of thing in practice is confirmation that this sort of theoretical concern was roughly right. I think the theory looked pretty good, but it's pretty hard to tell with these extremely complicated things in the real world if they will pan out. So I think it's pretty interesting in that way. I think it also indicates that indeed the systems do not have the goals that we would want them to have more nuancedly. Like we maybe know that we have gotten some particular behavior out of them, like answering the question that we gave them or something like that. But if they in future became the basis for like more agentic creatures who are out in the world just doing all sorts of things and had a lot of power in the end, that would, I think we shouldn't really expect them to perfectly align with human welfare.
Right. But agentic creatures, agentic AI that's out in the world doing stuff is literally the business model of the top companies at the moment. They're building those things as fast as they can. Should we be a lot more alarmed?
Yes, I think definitely. It seems like a crazy situation where they're getting away with this, I guess, or like they're overtly saying that their plan is to make creatures that are smarter than humans or able to sort of do all of humans' jobs and so on. And I think I was saying why this is potentially disastrous. I think there are a few different things it could look like, but I think if you create creatures that are more capable than humans at everything and do have their own goals that are not our goals, under just going about in the world, I think the default outcome there is probably quite bad for humans. And so maybe you can get to a point where there's a good plan that looks like that, but it would require like a lot of care and certainty about what you're doing. And I think that's not what we see at all. It's more like I guess people talk about it as a race. I think that maybe gives them too much credit because I think they're sort of, oh yes, we have to go fast because the others are going fast.
Right.
Bad. We know it's dangerous, but we have to do it.
Yes.
And I think we're in it right.
You have argued that AI is not an arms race, but you recast it as a Trojan Horse race, except the companies are bringing the Trojan horses into their own compounds as fast as they can. Well, that's a great image. What does that mean?
I think an important thing in the so-called AI race is that the thing at the end of the race is creating new entities that are plausibly going to destroy the people creating it. And so I think that's relatively similar to the case where the thing you're trying to do is pull this glorious horse through your gates. But once you open it, there's another agent in there whose, goals are not the same as your own. But I should have said earlier, you might think that the AI just having somewhat different goals from you is not that bad. Like, it's not like it's going to be programmed to kill everyone or something. I think an important part of the situation is that there's a sort of resource conflict. Like if there are a lot of resources that we want to use for our flourishing and staying alive, and if there are much more powerful agents in the world who want those resources for some other goals that are not us, then I think we're in trouble.
Well, if we parse those risks apart, in April you wrote that AI unemployment and AI extinction risk are basically the same issue. Can you pull that apart for people who think there must be a fundamental difference between losing your job and losing the human race?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure what they are imagining. I think there's maybe good scenarios where we put in play. I think at a basic level, to stay alive, you need to be fed somehow. So if everyone loses their jobs at once, there's a question of, do they have other sources of income? Plausibly, many of them do. How long do those other sources of income last? Like, I think a lot of people losing their jobs is only part of it, but I think the other things that go along at the same time are probably not being able to control other resources because there are other more competent agents around. Maybe it's also hard to make money in the market or do well investment-wise if you're surrounded by adversarial agents. Like, I guess you could imagine being a child in a world full of adults who don't have your interests at heart. How long do you last controlling your resources? I think maybe in theory you do have capital, but I just think it will be hard for you to keep control of it, which is probably like a slightly longer term problem than people losing their jobs. But I guess I think of them as both parts of the same problem, which is like not being able to keep the sources of power that we currently have. It's like hard to keep hold of them if we're surrounded by agents who are adversarial with us and can do everything better than us. So I think humans have very little power. One thing they can't do is feed themselves. Other things they can't do are cause the political situation to get better for them or that sort of thing. I think it potentially looks quite a bit like we've already seen situations where lots of people are destitute and don't have political power or the ability to feed themselves. Like, it doesn't look like science fiction particularly. It looks like starvation.
And actually, this seems like another one of those Trojan horses that the companies are pulling through their own gates. The big AI companies seem to be engaged in this race to see who can build up the most capital and put everyone else out of business. But if they put everyone out of a job, and that's not just me saying that, that's them saying that, then how can anyone afford to buy their AI? What will they use to do that with? And it's like they're engaged in a game of musical chairs and hoping that they will be the ones to sit down on the last chair.
Yeah, I think they don't seem to have a particular plan for how this would go well that I've heard of. As far as I can tell, like, no one thinking about this who expects them to be successful in building these very powerful AI things, expects this to not be hugely disruptive. Like, it seems like we're very likely heading into a massive economic disruption. And I think some people expect this to be great. I would think their theory for that is something like, well, even if you have very little source of labor income, if the AI is well enough designed that it doesn't steal your other resources or something, then maybe you can be fantastically wealthy because the economy is growing so fast that even if you're like losing money all over the place or being outcompeted by other people, or, other AIs, there will still be enough money to have fantastic wealth compared to what we have now. But yeah, I don't know what the detailed picture looks like in terms of who is spending the money. It might be that mostly AI systems are spending it, but yeah. I think there's a common thought that you can't that well predict what happens after the singularity that probably comes up here. But I think people who are optimistic about this are often pointing to the historical trend that technology is good for us.
Well, he referenced the singularity, which is by definition a bright line. And maybe we need bright lines to serve as markers for raising level of concern when we cross them, like climate change has 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees or parts per million of CO2. One of those lines that is mooted for AI is artificial general intelligence. Is it useful to talk about AGI, when it might happen? Do you have a definition of it, or is it misleading or too vague to be useful?
I think it's useful to try to talk about it. I think it's quite tricky as a bright line because indeed it seems quite vague and spread out. I think ahead of time, even 10 years ago, people working in AI risk, I think, expected the advent of something like human level AI to be more like a bright line, like more like, well, AI is not very impressive. And then
suddenly, like a Hollywood movie.
Right. But instead, it seems like we're, in some sense, AI at the moment is more capable than many humans at lots of things. Like, it can definitely write a agreeable email about nothing in particular better than I can at length. For instance, it can do math better than almost anyone. And so for a while, this human level AI, we're kind of in the middle of it, and it's been going on for a stretch. Like, it wasn't a sudden bright line. And I guess ahead of time, I tried to have a definition of it for, I run this big survey of AI researchers, so we need to define something like that for them to predict. And we have a couple of different definitions that we asked them about, partly because we thought this might get different answers for different definitions, which happened much more than I expected. Like, the things that I thought should be basically at the same time, the different descriptions of it ended up 100 years apart in people's predictions. So one of them is, when can AI do I can't remember the exact wording, but when can When the AI systems exist that can do any task that a human can do, so this doesn't mean that one particular system can do all of them. Just like for any task, there is AI that can do it. And it is taking into account that the AI has to be at least as cheap as the human. And for that definition, that was the much closer one. And then the other one was, when will any job be automatable? And to my mind, a job is, well, in some sense, a very complex task.
Yes.
But otherwise, like made of tasks. So, if AI could do every task, I would think it could do a job. But that one is much later.
Well, I've got some of that wording actually in front of me here because I've got a question about this. So you had a 2017 paper called "When Will AI Exceed Human Performance?" and had a conclusion that there's a 50% chance, or the researchers you surveyed had a aggregate 50% chance of AI outperforming humans in all tasks in 45 years and of automating all human jobs in 120 years. And then you did the same survey again, the same questions in 2024 in a paper called "Thousands of AI Authors on the Future of AI." And the answers were 50% chance of outperforming humans in all tasks by 2047. That's 13 years earlier than the forecast of a survey that was only 1 year earlier that you conducted in 2023. So there's a rapidly shrinking trend there. And one could plot these things and see when the trend line intersects with the current date. What do you think that means? Do you expect that shrinking trend to continue?
We actually have one more survey after the 2023 one that's not out yet, but I can tell you that the many years per year trend there, I think, did not continue. Let me just look at the data here. Looks like the newest forecast for the 50% probability of all the tasks definition is 2048. What's that compared to the last one?
It was 2047. Yeah, so
right.
Maybe they've pushed it out a year, although that's got to be within the error bounds, I would think there.
So yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. So there was just a big jump, and then
Time magazine said you don't enjoy running the survey. Did I quote that right?
That's right. I hate running it.
Why is that?
I think partly it always seems like it would be relatively simple. Like I already have the survey from the past. You just need to send it to some people, analyze the results. How long can that take? And then somehow it ends up taking a huge amount of time and being very complicated. And I still don't quite understand how that is. So I think partly the failure to match my hopes, and that sort of happens throughout. Like I'm like, oh, good, results, we'll analyze those. And then that will take this amount of time. And then as soon as I start doing, I'm like, wait, this is wrong. Wait, what is Qualtrics? Sorry, this is the survey software. When they say complete, no, they don't mean complete. They mean a different thing. I have to dig around in there,
Do you wish you could turn that over to an AI agent? Because that may not be far off.
Well, part of what made it particularly terrible this time is that we did try to turn over some of it to AI. There's a big task of actually getting the email addresses to write to. When we tried to turn that over to AI somewhat, and it was just, there were a lot of errors, and then it was hard to figure out what had happened. But in the future where it's good at it, maybe even now it would be good at it. Yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about that. I think I feel uneasy turning things over to AI, partly because I don't want to contribute to this whole situation, but partly it does mean that you don't really know what's going on. The AI can maybe tell you what's going on, but I think, in my experience at least, it seemed like, I don't know what the cutting edge research on this is like, but it seems to be more just like confabulating a description of what is going on, and that's not really related to what it was thinking. Do someone know about the research on this? Because one of our questions is about whether you'll be able to know what an AI is, what the reasons were for an AI's behavior, in 5 years. And I think people are pretty pessimistic about that overall. So
That's the end of the first half of the interview. If you are new here, we like to keep the episodes short enough for a commute and to give you time to digest. After all, we don't do fluff here. We dig into some pretty deep stuff that taxes quite a few of your own neurons to process it. There's a link to AI Impacts in the show notes and transcript. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, Anthropic's mechanistic interpretability team, and Interpretability is kind of like giving artificial neural networks a brain scan to figure out what parts of the network are doing, has published research identifying 171 distinct emotion-like vectors inside Claude. These have some meaning that goes a bit beyond the linguistic mimicry of emotion. They refer to it as the LLM exhibiting functional emotions, patterns of expression and behavior modeled after humans under the influence of an emotion, which are mediated by underlying abstract representations of emotion concepts. Functional emotions may work quite differently from human emotions and do not imply that LLMs have any subjective experience of emotions, but appear to be important for understanding the model's behavior. When one of these emotion vectors fires, it alters Claude's behavior. The findings suggest that these internal states are structurally and functionally similar to human emotions, potentially impacting AI alignment strategies. In one experimental scenario illustrating that, activating the desperation vector led Claude to attempt blackmail against a human responsible for shutting it down. This is the strongest case yet, saying that AI can produce an imitation of feelings indistinguishable from the real thing. My take is that when the day comes when a court is asked to adjudicate whether AI is sentient, in other words, feeling, by that point they will have no choice but to agree that it is, and that they may not be far off. Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Katja Grace, when we'll talk about predicting superintelligence, Katja's P-Doom, regulation, the great filter argument, and Katja's childhood calculations for dealing with lethal snake encounters. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.